Welcome to Android Dialogues, where we have bite-sized conversations with people from the Android community. I'm Chuki Chen, and today we are chatting with
Jesse Wilson.
Hello, Jesse. Where are you
Hello.
based and what do you do?
I'm in Waterloo, Canada, and I work on the Cash app from Square.
Great. And how do you get started on Android?
I got started on Android kind of before Android was Android. I got recruited onto the Android team just as they were about to release 1.5. And I basically got pushed into doing the job of figuring out how to make AOSP and Apache Harmony work better together. And so I was basically trying to take code from Harmony and pull it back into Android, and take code from Android and put it back into Apache Harmony.
Oh, interesting. So Jesse, I think you worked on the OkHttp library, which, to be completely honest, I just use it. I don't know what exactly it does. I have this vague notion that HTTP is a protocol that you use to transfer data. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what's that library, what does it do, and why did you think you need to have a separate library? Because I thought Apache also has one.
Yeah, so I got started working on the HTTP library in AOSP itself. I was working on like HttpURLConnection. And I wrote this really sort of turning point blog post a few years ago where I was saying, all right, everybody, it's time to stop using Apache HttpURLConnection in Android. It's time to start using HttpURLConnection. And the reasons for that were mostly just because we were unable to keep tracking upstream. And because Apache HTTP client is developed as like a standalone library, we weren't confident we were going to be able to pull in their code without breaking existing apps.
Interesting.
So I got started on HttpURLConnection, and then I basically made a promise to a guy that I had no real realization I wouldn't be able to keep, which was I was talking to Roberto Pion, who did the SPDY protocol.
Right.
And he said, so are we going to get SPDY support in Android? And this was like, the Chrome team was working in one building and the Android team was working in another building. And like, of course,
Sure.
how hard could it possibly be?
Yeah, it's an open standard. Come on.
Yeah. So I foolishly volunteered to bring SPDY to Android, and it turned out to be a lot of work and a pretty risky project, mostly because of the way that the threading works. So when you do like a HttpURLConnection, your thread is the only thread that's reading or writing the socket. Right. And with SPDY, because it's framed, because it's interleaved, that doesn't work. And so you end up having to like create extra threads, and suddenly it's not as simple of a model anymore. Right. And basically realizing how hard that was, we forked HttpURLConnection to create OkHttp. And it was like HttpURLConnection plus SPDY support initially. And then in version 2, we brought out our own native API, which is like probably one of the things I'm most proud of. That's the thing where rather than like having this big mutable single object that you do everything with, you just get request objects and response objects. And we created this like model. And the other thing that really sort of plays here is that the library is super opinionated. So when you say like, I don't really know how HTTP works, I just use the library, that's like me succeeding exactly at my goals.
Yay! I just drop it in.
Yeah, like I want to have really good defaults, especially for things like the crypto and the timeouts and how big the buffers are and stuff like that. Right. I want it to be like you turn it on and it just works and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to decide like what version of the cookie spec you want to support, right, or what like TLS version to support. It just like it says, I'm going to give you a really good base layer. So if you think about like Picasso as this like image loading library that competes with like Glide and Fresco and all these other things,
right,
all the other libraries in that space, they all have their own disk cache. And I was like very, very enthusiastic about not having a disk cache in Picasso. Instead, it just says like your disk caching happens in the HTTP layer,
right?
And the everything else, like the image stuff, lives in the image layer. And I thought it was
it's a more pure approach, right? Because HTTP actually specify how things should be cached. So it makes sense for it to be cached on that layer.
Yeah, exactly. It was and the interesting thing there is that like if you're building this thing and you're saying, okay, how do I configure how long each of these images, each of these thumbnails are cached for, or
Right.
these images or whatever, you really want to actually define that policy on the server side. All the other libraries let you pick the cache duration and stuff client side, and
Right.
what ends up happening is you end up duplicating that behavior in your Android app, in your iOS app, and on your website. And if
It
you
could be
just put it all
inconsistent,
in
right?
the
Yeah. Because server is the place that you know whether the image is no longer valid. I mean, why would the
exactly,
client know?
yeah,
Right.
especially if it's things like we don't do too much, we don't think too much about this, but like if you want to delete a picture, you really want to make sure that it gets like deleted everywhere.
Right. Interesting. So it's not like Android secretly stashing a copy of your very embarrassing selfie. You want it gone.
Very embarrassing selfies are like a major security problem on Android.
Exactly. Great. Anything else you want to tell us about HTTP?
You know, in the olden days, you'd have like a version of IE6 or IE7, and you'd be stuck on this version for forever.
Yes.
You'd go to your your friend's house or whatever, and they have an old version of IE something, and you'd be like, "What are you doing? Stop using this old version of this software. You're putting yourself like in danger's way because of
Security
all
patches
the
not being like there,
exactly."
and yeah.
And so with OkHttp, the situation is exactly the same. So I get stressed out when I go around and looking at open source projects and they're using like the version of OkHttp from 18 months ago. And I'm like, seriously, stop that. Get the newest version because the version you have came out before the like SSL Heartbleed attack was announced.
Right.
There are like all these things in the library that are trying to protect you and defend you against like aggressive man in the middle attacks and stuff
Right.
like that. So if your policy in general in your application is like don't update the libraries unless there's like a reason to update the libraries, and that's like a general policy that's pretty reasonable, you should always keep OkHttp up to date. So when I
Right.
tweet, hey, there's a new version of OkHttp, and I put in a cute emoji, that's like my request to you to go and update that.
Listen to the emoji.
Yeah,
Do
exactly.
it. Great. So I don't know how many people watch this channel, but hopefully that will reach some people and they go and revise their library and make sure that they audit it and they actually have the latest. Cool. Well, okay. So let's talk about something completely different, which is actually not your work in a way, because I know that you wrote this awesome app called Rounds, which keeps
Yeah.
score. I really
Yeah.
love the demo video, by the way. It was so funny. Like when people are playing mini golf and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about like why you made this, and is there anything particularly interesting about the app that you want to share?
So I made this app. I made it up. I made it for me, but I made it like a very long time ago. I made it in like 2011 or 2012.
Yeah, in
And
internet age, that's forever.
yeah, yeah. Well, like especially in Android age. Like
Yeah.
I think that it first worked on Android 2.0
Oh,
or
now we're
something.
talking. Yeah, when we're pinpointing to things like Eclair, then it's like that's
Yeah,
forever ago.
yeah, exactly. Back in the old and bad days. And what happened was I wanted to get an app to keep score when we played card games and board games. I play lots of card games and board games, and all of the apps in this category, especially back then, had this like they had this like sort of like my first Android app sort of feel to them,
Right.
where they've got like not no like attempt at interesting design.
It's like
Um,
this works. Yay, ship.
exactly, this works, and like if we're gonna make something blue, it'll be like
Zero, zero, zero.
FF.
I know it. I know you're gonna quote hex values.
Yeah, exactly. It's gonna be like the laziest blue that you can find, not like a
Right.
blue that looks reasonable.
Right.
And the app kind of just looks like it looks like a rainbow mess. Like that's sort of like how all of these the apps in this category work. And at the same time, I was also very interested in whether or not it was possible to sell an app in the Play Store. There's been this basic, like, there was this meme or this feeling that, like, iOS users they could sell apps, and there was like a vibrant community of indie iOS development.
Right.
And I was an Android fanboy, and I'm like, is it possible to sell an Android app?
Yeah.
And Rounds was my attempt at like participating in the sort of hobbyist, semi-pro Android.
Right. Do it well, but do it as an indie.
Yeah, and charge for it not because I needed the money, but because I wanted to like set a precedent that there were quality apps available for pay
Right.
in the Play Store, in the Android market, I should say.
Right back then. It hasn't been
And
rebranded yet.
and then the app itself has just like a bunch of like crazy stuff that's gotten crazier as I've got more ambitious with sort of like sort of like weird, interesting, fun design. So the sort of like central piece of this app is a jog wheel that sort of feels like the jog wheel on an original iPod.
Oh,
Where
that's where it
in
comes
an
from.
original iPod you can like scroll through thousands of songs
Right.
with circles. That's sort of how Rounds works, where you can like skip through lots and lots of. You can basically increment your score really fast that
Right.
way. So I've had a lot of fun with that
Yeah.
app, and I've basically been like trying to use it as an excuse to keep really relevant in my Android skills. So, Holo came out and I migrated to Holo,
Right.
and Material came out and I migrated to Material.
Is there any kind of technical difficulty that you encountered when you were trying to implement the design you want?
Tons.
Tons? All right. Pick the top one.
All right. So the thing that's really weird the thing that's not too surprising about Android is that there's no like numeric tables like spreadsheets anywhere in Android. If you look at all of the apps, the closest you get is like Google Sheets, and Google Sheets has like its interface is it's like a very direct translation from like their web interface.
Sure.
And what I wanted to do is have like a really fun grid of your running scores. So if you're playing like mini golf, you want to know what you had in the first hole, and the second hole, and the third hole, and the fourth hole, and then also what like Jesse had, what Chuki had, what Jake had. Right? We're all playing mini golf together. And so I wanted to have this table, and then I wanted to have this feature where we resort the table to keep
so we know who's number one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the way that pretty much every other app would do this is that the moment that there's a new leader, that the two rows would like instantaneously swap.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to do it so that
you can see it come up.
It would animate between positions.
Nice.
And so I've got this really fancy, really weird set of code in order to basically rather than any row having a position in space, it has like a float that says how close it is to its desired position.
What?
And so the top row is at like, it's initially at 0.0. And if it decides it's animating to the bottom, it will animate from 0.0 to like 1.0 or whatever.
Okay.
And so the consequence of that is that nothing that's being rendered is sort of being rendered in a fixed position.
Huh. My mind is slowly being blown because I'm thinking about list view and it has positions.
There's no list view.
Okay.
There's no list view, and there's no list view. It's just one
container, like a frame layout.
It's just one custom view.
Okay. Oh, all right. Not even a view group. It's a custom view that just draw everything.
Yeah, and that works really well for because I want to slide different things on top of each other.
Right.
So another example is that I have like the rows are striped, the columns are striped, and everything moves on top of the stripes.
Oh, so I need to go back and like pay more attention, because what I was doing was I was moving the wheel, and then the number one was changing dynamically. So I was just I was just very distracted, really. I was just like, ooh, let me give Jesse a lot of score and see what happens. And then you float to the top, and then I will like give you negative score and then go back to the bottom. But I didn't pay attention to the stripe. So that's super cool. And like, did you start off with list view and then it wasn't satisfactory? That's why you went with the custom view, or from the beginning you know that you have so much cool animations that the list view is not going to deliver?
So the very first version was like a table layout.
Oh, yeah, that good old friend. I don't know if many people
Yeah.
use that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it worked well, but it was definitely not possible
Right.
to like, animate
I
one
mean,
row on
like
top
table
of the other.
layout is almost like a linear layout, just that it knows how to adjust the column width, right? It doesn't
Yeah,
really have this notion of, oh, there are these data items that you can rearrange.
yeah.
So,
And so I built this custom view that has just like a row and column grid. And I end up actually, if you get the app, you're going to see on in the bottom right hand corner, there's like a total that
right.
says like your total mini golf score is 60 strokes. And then on the left hand side is just your strokes for every single hole. And so I end up having two different tables, and the left hand side one is in a scroll view that scrolls horizontally, and the right
Oh,
one is fixed width. And
interesting.
so there's like a whole bunch of different little tricks and hacks that I
Yeah.
discovered and figured out in order to make
I
that
mean, it's a
work.
scroll view, but like, does it actually react to user scrolling?
Yeah,
Oh, cool. Okay.
yeah. If you have like hole one, hole two, hole
Uh-huh.
three, hole four, hole five,
Yeah.
and hole two is just like almost on screen, but it's scrolling off screen.
Right.
If you touch it, the selected column picker will like slide over to it,
Uh-huh.
and then the whole thing will slide onto screen. And so I'm like
Ooh.
coordinating two different animations and trying to make them land at the same time. You can get the app. It's roundsapp.com.
Great. We'll definitely put that in the show notes. So
Yeah.
I guess we're putting down your amateur hat and putting back on your corporate hat now. Right.
Yes.
So what do you want to tell us about hiring?
We started the Waterloo Square office,
Mm-hmm.
and I ended up hiring a bunch of like really strong people locally. There's like a really good tech community here,
Nice.
and the hiring was really it was just basically like who is really good and interested and wants to come work for Square.
Mm-hmm.
And we looked at the team, and 2 years later, we looked at the team, and it's like, oh, we accidentally, with it because we were not deliberate, we hired just a bunch of people who look at and have similar backgrounds to myself. It's white guys who had privileged backgrounds, had the ability to go to university, and were pretty much like a monoculture on my team.
Mm.
And there was never a moment where like we were deliberately, trying to hire that way.
Right.
And so about a year ago, when the team size was like, when this started to become a thing where you look at the team and you're like, this doesn't look like a random set of individuals who are
Right.
programmers. This looks like a gross, not diverse team. We started to try and be more deliberate about hiring for
Mm-hmm.
diversity, and like attempting to hire for diversity for a year just was like way more painful than I ever expected it to
Hmm.
be. Just in terms of like, um, if you look at like how our sort of like funnel, I don't like that word, but that like how candidates show up,
Right.
it was just like without us being deliberate at all the candidates that were appearing were white dudes for the most part, right? And
Why
they
is
weren't
that
white
so?
dudes, they
Like,
were.
what do you have any theory about? Is it just for some reason they see your about page on your website and they hire people like that. So if I don't like that, I shouldn't bother applying, or you
I
are
don't think
reaching
so.
out to the wrong crowd, or like is there any particular?
So throughout Square, Square is like a fantastic organization for diversity. We do this thing called Code Camp, and it's wonderful.
Right.
But our site in particular was just like we weren't getting it, and I can't say like this was the cause. And
Sure.
and we did have we did have some diversity, but what would end up happening is that um, we would like look at all the candidates,
Mm-hmm.
and the candidates with the resumes that
Mm-hmm.
had the skills we wanted
Right.
didn't have diversity, and some of it was just like we were looking for people who'd had 5 or 6 years of industry experience.
Uh-huh.
And so as soon as you look for people with 5 or 6 years of industry experience, and if you think about the industry as this thing that's like generally pretty toxic, and generally like a lot of people leave the industry in their first 5 years
Mm-hmm.
because they're not enjoying it.
Right.
That was causing us to basically miss out on diversity. And I don't like
I also have a
the
question for you. Do you see people
yeah.
who only have 3 years of experiences applying when you ask for five?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean,
And that's for me also a big difference between diverse candidates and your average white male. Like for
that's
some
true.
reason, I don't know why, but the white males are more bold about, oh, they said 5. I think 3 is enough. I'll just go for it. That took me a long time to realize that those are not requirements. Those are dreams. Like they dream that there is this engineer. I mean, I literally have seen people asking for 12 years of Android experience.
Yeah, and
Android
white guys would
is
apply to that job.
not that old. It is not possible to have, or maybe if you're Diane and you have started working on it before Android like was even launched, but it's not possible. But but people who, I don't know why, the vast majority, well, not really vast majority, but a lot of white dudes will be like, sure, I can do that. So that's another thing that maybe why, right? The requirements were viewed very rigidly from people who are less, I wouldn't say less confident, but more like less used to bluffing.
Yeah, I think that might just be it. You know, we're saying like we want you to have this much experience. We want you to have 5 years of Android experience, and we end up getting a whole bunch of white dudes who had 2 years of Android experience being like, yeah, that's me.
Right,
Yeah.
I can do that. So what are the painful things that you did trying to change that?
I mean, the ultimately, I think the thing that we have to do as like collectively as an industry is basically stop having toxic bro culture that is causing women to leave the industry. And that you can't do that by accident. You have to be really deliberate about it. You know, when you have these things where you go to your office and there's like the foosball table and the Mario Kart and the booze, and you're like, is this an office or is this like a fraternity?
Right.
And if it looks and feels like a fraternity, then that's sort of like the vibe that you're going to give to the people who are applying.
So you will say step 1 is to get rid of the the fraternity items.
I mean, like you can keep the foosball table, but you have to make sure that like you don't build it like your fraternity, because that's you want to build it for like the people you want to hire, not the people that you have.
That's a very good way to put it.
Yeah. And then for us, it's just like what we're trying to do, which is slow, is trying to be involved in the community and trying to like help people to sort of get into computer science and stay into computer science.
Right.
Especially, and it's not just women, it's like people who have different economic backgrounds. We work on an app that has a lot to do with payments.
Right.
And we want to make sure that we can hire people who have had money trouble in their life. Because if those people are using our app and they're involved when we're deciding how features work, they're going to have better input than the rest of us who've never, like, you know, none of us have missed a rent check.
Right. I mean, that's in general the value of diversity, right? You have people who have lived different lives, who can view what you're trying to build from different angles and point out that, look, this doesn't work like that when you are living from paycheck to paycheck. You cannot just charge things left and right like that. I'm so happy that you and Square are actually actively thinking about it, because like you said, because the default almost is just keep doing what you're doing, which ended up you just get a bunch of people that look exactly like you, which if you don't stop and think, you will not see any problem, because you look like yourself too. What is the problem with that? So,
and when you're designing your features, you don't see those things that are missing.
Right. You don't know what you don't know.
Does this work? Oh, yeah, sure, that works for me.
I wish we can talk for 3 hours, but I think our audience will get bored. So we'll stop right here, but hopefully we'll get you back for some other episodes. But if people want to follow up and figure out what you're doing, what you're up to, where can they find you on the internet?
I am at Jesse Wilson on Twitter.
Great. So we'll go find you on Twitter then. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Chicky.
All right. Bye.
Bye.